Okay, so welcome to the first of 10 extracts that I'm going to read from my book, Kiss from a Rose. Here it is. It's about my journey with cancer over the last 10 years. I'm 26 now, and just a few days after my 16th birthday, I was diagnosed with a Ewing sarcoma. And I wrote a book about all my experiences since, mainly to help other teenagers that are going through the same thing. I hope it offers a little bit of support and comfort. It's not sugar-coated, it's very honest. But I haven't written it to scare anybody, just to guide and advise, I guess, really. So the first extract I'm going to read is about my diagnosis. And it's from the chapter called Man is Harder Than Iron, Stronger Than a Stone, and More Fragile Than a Rose. Okay. On the morning of my first exam, I was so nervous I could barely breathe, but it was English, my favourite subject, so it was probably the best one to take first, to ease my mind into exam mode. I was right. After I had completed English, the next few exams didn't seem so daunting. I felt prepared and ready as I entered the exam hall at the start of each one, and elated as I ran out of the hall at the end. But after a week packed full of exams, I was looking forward to a few days' break before my next scheduled exam, and nearly forgot that my follow-up appointment was also due on the first of my 3 days. The weather was starting to improve, soon the exams would be over, and I had never felt better. I was looking forward to my party exactly a week after the final exam was scheduled, and even more excited to be seeing my boyfriend Pete regularly again. The day of my hospital appointment soon arrived. It was my first exam-free day, and all I wanted was to snuggle up in bed for the morning and enjoy the fact I hadn't woken up surrounded by revision papers and last-minute attempts at cramming. Mum brought me in a cup of tea and had run me a bath, but I was still Little Miss Grumpy as I sleepily found my way to the bathroom. I had been scheduled to attend the follow-up appointment at Queen Mary's Hospital where the operation had taken place. But a few days before I was due to meet the surgeon again, we received a letter saying my local hospital had referred me to a more specialised hospital in London, but it gave no further explanation. I really couldn't understand why we had to visit another hospital, especially one so far away. I felt fine, I was getting on with life, and I really wanted to stay in bed. I had forgotten all about those dark days, they seemed so far away now, but Mum insisted, so we went. My nan came along too, just for a day out, while Grandad drove us the 10-minute journey from our house to Sidcup station. And he told Mum to call him when we wanted to be picked up later in the day. The hospital we were going to was called the Royal Marsden, which is situated in South Kensington. I had no idea what the hospital specialised in, and had absolutely no reason to expect that things would turn out to be so serious. On the train journey I was relaxed, and Mum told me how nice that area of London was, and what the houses were like there. So much so that after a while I was actually quite looking forward to getting there and having a look around. The journey wasn't a long one, and soon we were walking out of South Kensington tube station into the glorious summer sunshine. Immediately I thought how Mum had been right about the houses. As we walked along a side street that led to the hospital, I was in a daze looking at all the really fancy buildings and apartments which were complemented by the stunning cars parked outside them. The weather was absolutely gorgeous. The sun was beaming down on us, and I was looking forward to getting home and spending the afternoon in the garden, albeit revising. We entered the hospital, and I remember thinking how grand it was. It was completely different from Queen Mary's and Sidcup. There were even carpets along the corridors. We found the department that I needed, and I signed in at reception. I had brought a few magazines to read while I was waiting, but needn't have bothered, as I was called into the consultant's office almost as soon as I sat down. Nan stayed in the waiting room as Mum and I walked down the tiny corridor which led to the doctor's office. Inside, a nurse was waiting for me. She had a sympathetic smile and beckoned me to sit on the chair next to her. She explained that the consultant would be along in a minute, and she asked how I was. I started gushing about my exams, how well they were going, that I was looking forward to throwing a huge party in a few weeks, and which A-levels I had picked for the following September. She said nothing. She just sat looking at me with the same smile as I went on and on. Just then, an elderly, grey-haired man popped his head around the door. "Natasha?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. He stood with the door open. His hand remained resting on the handle as he simply said, "Well, because your tumour was malignant, you're going to need 6 months of chemo, with additional treatment if necessary." And with that, he disappeared. He came and went so fast, I had absolutely no idea what he'd said. I looked at the nurse and said, "Right, is that then?" and stood up to leave. And she looked at me with such a serious expression, she asked me if I knew what malignant meant. No, I didn't, but from the look on her face I could tell it wasn't good news. I gave a nervous laugh and sat back down as I said no. I gave a nervous laugh and sat back down as I said no. I turned and looked at Mum, and tears were streaming down her face. "My little honey, he's saying it was cancer," Mum said. But that's ridiculous, I thought. I'm far too young for any of that. It had been my 16th birthday just a couple of days previously. Mum was obviously mistaken. I looked at the nurse, waiting for her to correct my mum, saying it was actually something much less serious than cancer. But she said nothing, and she just looked at me with that same stupid smile. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I just couldn't take in what they were saying to me. I just sat staring at the wall behind the nurse, unable to even think clearly. Suddenly the hospital's fire alarm sounded. It was loud and constant, drilling right into my head. "We have to evacuate," the nurse said as she jumped up. "What? But it'll just be a practice drill, won't it?" I exclaimed. "I can't go anywhere until somebody tells me more about this." "Well, I don't know if it's a drill. That's the whole point. We need to leave the building," the nurse said, getting impatient with me. I felt like I was in a dream. I couldn't believe that they had just dropped this bombshell on me and then expected me to press some sort of pause button on my emotions as we adhered to a fire drill dress rehearsal. I felt myself standing up and being guided by my mum towards the office door. We walked through the waiting room where we met my nan, and the three of us followed the fire escape route to the front of the hospital. There was a large crowd and 3 fire engines, with firemen everywhere. I was so confused. Everything was happening in slow motion. I was screaming inside, trying to wake myself up from a nightmare I just didn't see coming. My nan looked at Mum as we stood amongst the confused crowd that had assembled in the street outside the hospital. "Everything okay?" Nan asked. "This is all a bit exciting, isn't it? I can't see any smoke though, can you?" "It's cancer," Mum said, disbelief in her voice. "She got cancer." "What?" My nan stood with a completely bewildered look on her face. "What are you talking about?" We stood in silence for a few minutes. I don't think any of us really knew what to say. "Well, how serious is it? What are they going to do for her?" my nan asked. "Well, I don't know," Mum replied. "We didn't get that far." Again, silence fell over the 3 of us, and my mum held my hand as we stood watching the 3 fire engines and their crew act out their battle against a non-existent blaze until everybody was told that it was safe to re-enter the building. Mum and I were directed straight back into the consultant's room, where we were joined again by the nurse and also the doctor I had briefly met earlier. The nurse must have approached him and asked him to come back in to see us after the outrageously inappropriate way he had addressed me. He apologised for the way he had broken the news, saying that he thought I'd already been aware of the diagnosis. But I still thought his attitude was rather blasé nonetheless. But he explained that a biopsy had been carried out on the mass of cells that had been removed from my intestines by the doctors at Queen Mary's, and they had suspected that the cells were cancerous. He explained that a biopsy had been carried out on the mass of cells that had been removed from my intestines by the doctors at Queen Mary's, and they had suspected that the cells were cancerous, forming what was called a Ewing sarcoma. This had been confirmed by the medics at the Royal Marsden, which turned out to be a hospital that specialises in oncology, or cancer research and treatment. It is a rare form of the disease that is usually found in young men, normally in their legs. The doctor went on to explain that my tumour could have started anywhere before travelling around my body until it eventually got stuck in my intestine. It had done so much damage, and he predicted from the size of it that if nothing had been done, I probably wouldn't have lasted much longer than 3 days. 3 days. I looked at Mum, so grateful to her for standing her ground in Queen Mary's Hospital that day. The consultant continued by explaining that I would need a complete body scan known as a computed axial tomography, or CAT scan, which provides doctors with a 3D image of the inside of your body to ensure that the cancer is nowhere else. He then said he was going to book scans to check my bones, bone marrow, breasts and brain. And once they were satisfied that the rest of my body was clear, they could decide how much chemotherapy I would need, and also which type would be most effective in getting rid of all the cancerous cells, including any tiny cells too small to be detected by the scans, and also if I'd need any radiotherapy after the chemotherapy. He told me to expect the test to take place within the week and to start my treatment within the next 2 weeks. But all I could think about was my exams. I had worked so hard, too hard, to simply give up halfway through. I had proven my GP and the consultant at Queen Mary's wrong, and I had shown my friends and the teachers who also doubted me that I wasn't simply trying to draw attention to myself. I wanted to do my exams. I wasn't trying to get out of them. I wanted to be successful. So I explained that I was right in the middle of my GCSEs and had another 3 weeks of exams, plus a highly anticipated party to throw before any of this could take place. I told him that it would all have to wait. And he laughed, admiring my determination, and explained that I would need the scans done as soon as possible, but he compromised, saying, dependent on the results, I may be able to put off the chemotherapy for a few weeks. I wrote down my exam schedule and he took it, promising to arrange the scans around them. He then stood up, shook my hand, said he'd be in touch, and left. I turned to the nurse as she began to explain a little about chemotherapy, but I couldn't hear her. The only thing I knew about chemotherapy from the little I had read and seen from the documentaries on TV, that I was going to lose all my hair. I had an image of a small, bald girl curled up on a hospital bed, attached to a drip, fear and helplessness in her eyes. That's going to be me, I thought.